everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the CMU Sport Management Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Sandel, and today I am joined by the Assistant Director of Recreation and IM at Eastern Michigan University, Don Gillette. Don, thank you for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Of course. This is our first episode that we have recorded since the end of the semester, so I want to give a quick shout out to all of our students and staff for completing another school year, and I hope that everyone's off to a wonderful summer. How about you, Don? How's your summer so far?
So far, so good. Getting in some golf and, time to take some vacation days and enjoy it. So it's been so far, so good. Hopefully the same for you.
Yeah, of course. We're just starting off, or we're right before Memorial Day this weekend, so a very busy weekend in the state of Michigan with all the bodies of water in the state. So the first thing I'd like to get into with every person that comes on the podcast is just before you even came to Central, like what was the inspiration to come to Central for sport management in the first place?
Wow. Feels like forever ago.
I was going to say, I hope I'm not going back too far.
No. So I grew up in Macomb, Michigan, metro suburb of Metro Detroit, went to Dakota High School. And really in high school, I look back on it and I kind of joke with my parents and tell them they didn't do a very good job of directing me for my college choice. Ultimately worked out great. I loved my time up at CMU. But looking back in my senior year of high school and junior year of high school, I didn't do a whole lot of prep, and I don't suggest doing that. I got lucky. It worked out attending Central. When I decided to go there, my main reason was because a friend of mine from high school was going there and he needed a roommate. And I looked into it and I had no idea they had a sport management program. I had really no idea what I wanted to do, but I've been involved with sports my whole life. It's something that I've always had a passion for. And when I went to CMU, I originally started thinking I was interested in broadcasting. So I went sport broadcasting and then ultimately realized, we have back then they called it sports studies, which is essentially
heard that. Yeah,
it's the same program of study, and the rest is history. So again, don't suggest that to any graduating or soon to be graduating high school students about their planning and preparation for college. But luckily it worked out well for me, and again, really enjoyed my time at Central overall, and specifically in the sport management program.
So once you were in the sport management program, was there a specific way in athletics that you kind of leaned towards immediately where you wanted to go professionally? Because as you know, and everyone who listens knows, there's so many different career paths you can go down in athletics. So was it immediate that you wanted to go to the recreation side of things, or was it something that came along the way?
It definitely came along the way. My first job on campus was at the SAC. I was an intramural official. So initially started off umpiring slow pitch softball games for the IM program up at CMU. And then that evolved into flag football, basketball. I basically officiated every sport and turned into a intramural supervisor. But in terms of pursuing that as a career, I'd say I kind of poked around. I think initially I always thought, and I think, a lot of people, not to say it's a bad thing, but, thought about being an athletic director. I worked the last 11 years professionally before coming to Eastern in athletics, primarily small NAIA operations and athletics. But I did a field study. It would have been while I was at Central with my high school athletic director. Not to say that's not a great career path for some, but for me, it really wasn't.
Right.
And at the time, I kind of dabbled. I thought about, operations for professional sports. I had a buddy that worked for the Detroit Tigers at Comerica Park doing security. Actually applied for a job there, didn't get it, but I think ultimately it worked out well. So most of my career at Central and my time in Mount Pleasant was working at the SAC and intramurals. And then I did a internship with the city of Mount Pleasant in their Parks and Rec department, running their my official title was recreational sport assistant. So I ran their softball leagues, their youth sport programs. So I kind of fell in love with the recreation side of things, both community and campus rec. And fast forward now, several years later, still working in that industry.
So when you did that internship with the city of Mount Pleasant,
Mm.
what was the biggest things that you were exposed to as a student at Central Michigan, kind of getting that outside experience other than at the university?
Sure. Working at the university, you deal a lot with college kids. You deal a lot with, the struggles or the intensity of intramurals on campus, which
Right.
can be overblown by some. But
That
when
I
you,
definitely can agree with that.
of course, but when you shift away from campus and you work with the community, I mean, you're dealing with a much more diverse population. So having an opportunity to not only deal or work with the community, adult recreation, folks who are significantly older than me, running adult leagues, but also running the youth sports programs as well. That was cool to see. And a fun fact was one of my tasks was to give golf lessons to students, or not students, but kids up there. And I actually got to witness an 8-year-old hit a hole in one.
Really?
Yeah, up at CM, or not at CMU, but in Mount Pleasant there.
Wow.
So that was kind of a fun experience.
That's a that hurts me as a amateur golfer hearing that a
Yeah.
child can do that.
Yeah. It was like 100-yard hole. He hit a driver. It didn't even get off the ground. It just like ran all the way up there, hit the pin and went in. It was incredible. Something,
Oh, that's an awesome story.
very cool. Yeah.
So you talked about the experience that you had at Central and kind of taking you down that way. So once you were done at Central Michigan, was there a specific spot that you wanted to go to and ended up somewhere else, or what was the first move coming out of CMU?
So I graduated in 2008 as an undergrad, and I actually went to CMU for 1 year of grad school. So I stayed, and I went enrolled in the master's program, sports administration, in 2008, 2009. I did not finish at Central. I actually went down to the University of Southern Mississippi for a graduate assistantship. So to answer your question, I never expected to move south. I never expected to live in Mississippi. Um, but I ultimately came to a point where I realized I needed a graduate assistant position in this area, campus recreation. So I went down to Southern Miss and did a year GA in intramural and club sports. Um, Looking back to my time when I graduated from CMU, I really wanted to stay there. I wanted to pursue a master's there. I wanted to get a graduate assistant position, whether that be, at the SAC or elsewhere. Ultimately, it didn't work out. And at the time, I was pretty bummed out about it. But I think ultimately, looking back, it was better. Had another experience, down at Southern Miss, completely different culture, completely different, school. So it worked out well. When I went down to Southern Miss, it was a 2-year appointment, but 1 year into it, they were going to no longer allow out of state tuition.
Oh, wow.
So my tuition would not have been covered fully like it was with my first year. So I had a decision: I could stay the second year and pay out of pocket, or um, do the master's program in 1 year, which is what I did. So I was down there for a year, graduated that August. And then I lucked out with the first position, my first professional position. I got to move back home, and I started at Lawrence Tech as their assistant athletic director in 2010.
So when you made that decision to go down to Southern Mississippi, how tough was that for you to, move all the way down south? You said you were from Michigan, went to
Yeah.
school in Michigan. So making that switch to a different culture and everything down south, how difficult was that at first?
It was very hard. I mean, I didn't know anybody. I didn't know, I had no family down there, but they were really very welcoming. I still have relationships with the folks I worked with down there. So ultimately it worked out well, but it was tough, moving away from family and friends. Um, but again, in the moment, there were times where I don't think there were definitely times where I was homesick and wanted to come back, but I'm glad I stuck it out. And looking back, it's something I say I would never want to move and live down there, but I wouldn't trade that experience for anything. So
Right.
that's one, I guess, when doing this podcast and talking to you about it, it's not being afraid to like make that jump. And ultimately, it's a year of your life, or maybe two, or maybe it turns into something that you didn't expect was going to be as great as it was, right? So take that leap of faith, and if nothing else, it's an experience that you can look back on.
Yeah, it's something I'd like to ask most guests that come on this show is just about because most of them, had gone somewhere out of state or even, farther to do some sort of experience. And some people stayed there, some people came back to Michigan. But in athletics, it seems like that is something that is very crucial is getting that experience farther away from where you are and going out of your comfort zone, essentially.
It is, and I mean, these jobs are, you know, they are competitive, right? And they're highly sought after. So, if you're going to really pigeonhole yourself and say, I want to be um, a head baseball coach in the Big Ten, right? Well, okay, there's only so many of those
Yeah.
opportunities. So, diversifying and opening up that casting a wide net and accepting an opportunity elsewhere is beneficial at times.
So you said that once you finished up at Southern Miss, you ended up at Lawrence Tech back in Michigan. How did that process come about of getting the chance to come back?
Yeah. So it would have been my year at Southern Miss. We attended the NERSA conference, which is our national governing body, National Intramural Recreational Sports Association. The director at LTU, or at that time, he was the assistant director at Lawrence Tech, was there, and we had known each other, through colleagues, and I wouldn't say we were close, but we knew each other.
Right.
And we were at the conference, and he was talking to me about how his director was retiring, and they were promoting him to the director position. At the time, at LTU, there was no athletic program. It was just a recreational position. So running the intramural club sport, I mean, similar to what I did at
Right.
CMU and at Southern Miss. But they were in the very early stages of exploring adding athletics. So had that conversation, really expressed my interest, moved back home after I graduated from Southern Miss, and a month later interviewed and got the position. So really worked out well. I wanted to be back home, and I was able to move back in with my parents for a couple of years before I ultimately bought our house and moved out of there. But it was really exciting to get back home and not only work in the industry that I was very passionate about, but also having the opportunity to start a brand new athletic program, which not many people have that opportunity.
That was exactly going to be my next question. Like, what was that process like of being a
Yeah.
part of the start of a program?
Yeah. So when I went there, like I said, we had 3 club sports at LTU. We had a club hockey program, women's volleyball, men's soccer, and then they were kind of off and on with the bowling team. When I left, I'll go back and talk a little bit more about that. But when I left in 2021, so I was there for 11 years, there were 30 plus teams and over 600 student athletes. So we built it from nothing
Wow.
to a lot, right?
Right.
So it was very interesting because there's a lot of governance and there's a lot of, we all think of the NCAA, they oversee all these teams. Obviously, CMU being a Division I program, we all know there's D2 and D3, but I never heard of the NAIA before.
Right.
And, that was the route that they planned to take, which looking back, I think it was the right decision. And, just having site visits with folks from the national office, the conference, it was really kind of interesting to see what all the requirements were for Lawrence Tech to, engage in athletics, what we were lacking. We had a field house is what we called it. And it was strictly for recreational use. So a lot of things had to be retrofitted. When you added a basketball program, you had to put the adequate 3-point line down. You had to add shot clocks, all these things that you don't think about when you're running a rec center, right? It doesn't matter if you don't have shot clocks,
Right.
but now it does. And you got to make sure that the 3-point line, when they add new rules, right, you got to put in a new arc and you got to put it. So, and for a school like the University of Michigan, that's no big deal. They have money, uh, you know,
Out the wazoo.
no problems whatsoever, right? But these small schools, those are things you don't think about. It's like, okay, well, we got to rip up the floor and put down, paint new lines. That costs money. So, but no, the process was very interesting. Something that I was very excited to be a part of, and just learning kind of what the governance is like for the NAIA, the WAC, the Wolverine Hoosier Athletic Conference, which LTU was and still is a part of. And then just learning, different eligibility rules. It is very substantially different than what the NCAA is. So that's one thing I look back on is, when you go through an academic program, there's a lot of talk about the NCAA, but I hope that, and I wish that there was a little more focus on, these different leagues and different options for folks to, explore careers in.
Yeah, especially with, now with all the issues that the NCAA has been going through the last several years, it definitely is. It's all focused on the top schools, and I think that all the lower schools definitely don't get thought about in those decisions.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like they've created an elevated division of Division One,
Right,
right?
exactly. I mean, the Power Five is essentially in its own
Yeah, it's yeah,
realm.
exactly. So it's kind of unfortunate at times, but you look at it and money drives a lot of decisions, and I think that's the main driving factor here. I understand it. I still love the sport and watching those high profile games, but I think it does leave some of the lower Division One schools kind of behind a little bit.
Gotcha. So you said you spent 11 years at Lawrence Tech.
Yes.
So then what led into the decision to finally end up where you currently are now, back in recreation at Eastern?
Sure. So, as you know, and I'm sure a lot of people listening to this podcast know that a life in collegiate, intercollegiate athletics is not your typical 9 to 5. There's a lot of nights, a lot of weekends, and when I made the decision to come here to Eastern, excuse me, I had a 6-month-old daughter at home. Still do. She's now 3, but I kind of was at a crossroads, if you will, where I really loved working at Lawrence Tech. I still have, I golfed with my boss last night from LTU, so we're still friends. And he fully supported my decision to make that move. Work-life balance was a big one, but I think primarily was just my kind of going back to my roots. I really missed working in a dedicated campus recreation department, and we did do campus rec at Lawrence Tech. However, my job primarily when I left was athletics, overseeing, direct supervision of head coaches, overseeing eligibility, game day operations. So while we still provided a recreational experience for our students, I wasn't really doing any of that. And this opportunity to, work when I came here for my interview, brand new renovated facility. I got great vibes from the team. Still do have a great relationship with everyone that works here. So it was kind of an easy decision, although I would say it was also difficult, if that makes any sense,
Well,
right?
yeah. I mean, being there for so long, that's got to be
Yeah,
difficult
no,
to move on.
the opportunity, the job itself was something I couldn't pass up, and it was hard to leave something that we built, and then a good core of people that I used to work with. So, and one thing too, I wasn't really actively looking. I wasn't looking to move. I wasn't looking to sell a house. I wasn't looking to buy a new house. So if this opportunity didn't come up, I would probably still be at LTU. But a lot of things, fate happens, things happen for a reason, and very fortunate to be where I am at now. But I guess to answer your question, the locality of it being somewhere that I could still live in my house and commute to, but also more importantly was just the opportunity to get back to a dedicated campus rec department and facility.
So for someone like yourself who has had the opportunity to work in athletics and recreation, for maybe a current student at Central or someone who just graduated and kind of doesn't know what path they want to go if they're debating between both sides, what would you say is like the biggest difference between working in recreation and athletics?
Oh, that's a good question.
It's kind of a loaded question, but
No, that's good to think. I mean, there's a lot of similarities, right?
right.
Um, you know, I always remember. So my supervisor, my boss, when I was at Central, he said a term that has stuck with me. Now I'm going to date myself. 18 years later, and he said, working in intramurals and campus rec, it's like recess for college kids, and it really is, right? Like that's the college kids' outlet to whether you're going to work out individually, do a group fitness class, play intramurals, any number of activities that you can do at the campus rec center. So, um, not to say athletics isn't fun, but I feel like we really do a good job of having fun in campus rec.
Right.
Athletics is, I want to say this very polite. It's a business, right? And we just briefly talked about kind of, the Division I model and how the
Yeah.
NCAA is, letting money drive a lot of their decisions. Even at the high school level, or even the low NAI, like at Lawrence Tech, right? Like there's a lot to a game day. For example, when I was working at Lawrence Tech, we just added a football program not long ago. Realize that the officials, the referees that work a football game get there 4 hours before the game. They watch film. So it may be a noon game, but you're there at 8 o'clock in the morning, sometimes earlier, to do setups,
Right.
and then the game's over maybe from noon to it's over at 3:30, but you're there then till 7, 8 o'clock cleaning up. So not to say it wasn't great, because those game days were a lot of fun, but I think campus rec and recreation in general does a better job of um, allowing us, not only the participants, but the workers, have fun, and that's really what I value. Um, so
Yeah. The vibes are better, you could
yeah,
say.
and again, I don't want to say, because I had a great experience, and I think there are a ton of great. We're all in this program. We all have a sport management background for a reason, right? It's rewarding work, but I think too many times folks in whether they're at Central or elsewhere in a sport management program, they don't see the other options. They don't think about those other options.
Right.
I spoke to a class here, a sport management class here at Eastern, and you know, just by a quick show of hands or a quick poll of the students, it was all, you know, wanting to work high level Division I athletics, which is great, but there's other things out there. I think that's just the biggest thing for me is diversify what your experiences are in, because you don't know what you like until you've tried it, if that makes sense. And I think, even if that experience is something that you didn't care for, you now know that, right? And you don't know until you try.
Yeah, I think that's a big reason why myself and Jen Eaton, we wanted to have
Yeah.
you on the podcast,
Mhm.
because that's been the main goal of this podcast. It's not just to have the same people that all work in the same sports professionally. It's to get different people who work in sports and have had different paths. And I think that having the recreation outlook is very important for, especially now that we're in summer. I mean, incoming sport management students that maybe aren't too familiar with the options once they graduate. So I think that went into a lot of this decision.
I will say, if can look back at myself 20 years ago when I was in high school, I would have never known that you could pursue a career like this, and B, thought that I would be where I was at today. It just
Uh-huh.
never crossed my mind. So again, for new incoming students, really just hopefully getting a better idea of what their options are, right? Um, and I feel like the world of campus recreation in general, athletics too, sport management, has been a great career for me. Um, and I really do appreciate the diverse skill sets that's allowed me to achieve.
So now moving into your current day at Eastern,
Mhm.
I love asking this question because it's a very unserious question. What
All
does
right.
your day to day look like in your current job? Because obviously we know in athletics, a day to day is not the same every single day. Obviously, I will rephrase this question. In the summer compared to now, how different is excuse me, in the summer compared to the school year,
Yeah.
how different does your schedule look?
It's a good question, and it's similar. Not every day is the same. I mean, there are those administrative tasks that have to happen, right? Like we have to pay our bills, we have to run payroll, we have to schedule students to work, we have to, do all those things. But a lot of what I do overseeing a facility, I do a lot of walking around. I do a lot of, I try to be aware of my surroundings. Trying to identify. What areas need attention? Did the custodians miss this room last night? Is this light out? One of the fortunate things is that we do have a newly renovated building, but over time, those things wear out. So trying to be proactive, have some foresight to see, okay, well, this may not be an issue today, but how can we plan for it to, again, hopefully be proactive as opposed to reactive. I think that's a lot of my day is seeing, where trouble could happen, where issues could happen. Just to give an example, last night we had some high winds. Our power went out here. So I was
Wow.
taking phone calls last night from our student supervisors about, how to handle the situation, and the power came back on, and then the fire alarm was going off. So, you don't really, there's really no playbook for a day to day. But a lot of what I do and what I try to do is just be visible, be an advocate for our students, be someone that they can talk to. Um, you know, Again, I talk about having that fun, having that relationship, having those, being able to be a mentor to students. Um, but while we do have a job to do, we have to run a building. I think what I really enjoy about my day to day is just those conversations I get to have with students, and then the relationships that we, as the professional staff, also have very good relationships as well. During the summer, it's a little bit lighter. Our hours are less, but the summer is the time to, again, be proactive, plan for the upcoming school year, work with all of our departments, whether it be intramurals or fitness, to make sure that they have the space needs or the spacing areas that they need for the school year. So scheduling out those rooms, working with our the rest of our staff here to make sure that our needs are set, and then working with our campus partners to make sure that their needs are set. So working with the academic classes that use our space to make sure that their classroom space is reserved and not there's no conflicts. Working with other departments that utilize our space for we host a scuba class in our pool. We host several weightlifting classes, and then several groups just partake in our offerings as well. So a lot of during the summer is that planning phase, where during the school year it's just react, right? Like what what sort of events do we have going on, and then just being visible and being an advocate for our students.
And you've kind of mentioned all the favorite things that you like about your position. So moving to the other side of it, and
Mhm.
this can be current or this can be like in your past, what are some of the biggest challenges that you have faced or you face in your career?
I think working in higher education, and this isn't unique to Eastern Michigan, it's not unique to Central Michigan, it's not unique to Southern Miss or Lawrence Tech. Working in higher education, things sometimes move slow. And what I say by that is um, a lot of what we do requires the approval from a lot of different layers within university administration. So biggest challenge for me is I see a problem and I like to fix that problem, or I like to address it, or I like to make a plan and go. Um, for me, my biggest challenge throughout my career, and you could fill in the blank, it could be at EMU, it could be at LTU, it could be at wherever I have been, is having that patience, right? Like, um, I'm not a patient person. I like to get things done. And as you mature, you start to realize, okay, I need to have a little bit more patience. But I think that's been my biggest challenge is just, a lot of what we do requires the help and the assistance of others, which is great. But, putting your patience cap on at times, because sometimes, um, we really want to just get things done, but need to pump the brakes a little bit. So my biggest challenge is having the patience to, um, you know, patience for sure.
Yeah. So the last thing I have for you, and is the way that I like to close off every
Yeah,
episode. You've kind of already talked about this a little bit, so if it's a repeat of information, that's completely fine. But
sure.
what is the biggest piece of advice you have to either current sport management students that are towards the end of their undergrad or incoming students that are going to be freshmen in the fall?
Yeah. I think, and I wouldn't say this too loud, but you do learn a lot in your classes, right? Like that's a very important core foundation for your career. But you're going to learn even more by getting out and doing different things, working in different areas. The world of sports is very vague, right? Like we've talked about a lot of different industries, and I appreciate you having me on, but I think I represent an industry that gets maybe not thought about or overlooked a lot. And don't be afraid to try go work, pick up a few hours working at the SAC or the campus rec center. I say SAC specific to CMU.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, you may not like it, but that's okay, right? I fell in love. My first job on campus, as I mentioned before, was umpiring slow pitch softball. To this day, I still officiate high school football. I
Oh,
officiate
that's awesome.
high school basketball, and I've done softball and volleyball and baseball. So um, that stuck with me now 18, 20 years later. So don't be afraid to try new things. And there's jobs that I've had that I wouldn't want to do again. I don't think I mentioned this, but I was one of the equipment. I was assisted with equipment manager for the football team when I was at CMU. I did not care for that. It was early mornings, and you did a lot of the grunt work, which again is not for some folks that's a great opportunity to get involved with the football program. But I tried it. It was a great experience, but it was something that wasn't for me. And I wouldn't have known that until I tried. And I think that's my biggest piece of advice. And I told the sport management class here at Eastern, I would tell anyone that is in this industry, diversify your skill sets, diversify your experiences, because until you do, you won't know what you actually like in this industry.
I know I said last question, but just
No, please.
a
Yeah,
personal question that just sort
yeah,
of thought of. You said you're a ref in
yep.
high school sports. How do
Mhm.
you deal with the fans and with the crowd? Because that
So
is something that my mom has always wanted me to become an umpire in baseball, and I
yeah,
just have told her I can't do that, mom. I can't deal with the crowd.
you really the approach I take is I they really don't know what they're talking about more times than not. Okay.
Definitely.
And you're right. The fans, the parents, those are the worst part of the equation. The players are generally fine. The coaches, sure, there's troubles, but more times than not, you just got to ignore it. Just let it roll right off your back. Smile, be polite, kill them with kindness, ignore it. The minute and this is the same with any conflict, right? Like the minute you give it oxygen, the minute you fuel the fire, right?
Right.
The minute you talk back, the minute you, engage in their immaturity, for lack of a better term, that's what they want. So if you just ignore it and move on, that's the tact I've taken. And I'd say for me, it's been a great way to stay engaged, stay involved in the sports that I love. um, and I would say too, to any sport management or college student for that matter, I'm going to speak to you too, Kyle. Your mom's right. We need youth. We need the youth out there to officiate these games. I think the average age of an official in the MHSA is like 6 years old. So no one's around forever.
Right.
So we need to engage the youth. But you know, I think for me, when I officiate, it's just ignore it.
Yeah.
Just ignore it. They don't know what they're talking about. They don't know the rules. It's kind of funny at times too, where you hear them say something and you just say to yourself, like, you have no idea what you're talking about. And
Right.
ultimately, the comeback I always want to say that I don't is I say, do you really think I care who wins this junior varsity girls basketball game between Team A and Team B? Think I came here with a
Exactly.
rooting interest? I don't care, right? So um, ignore
Yeah.
it. That would be my biggest piece of advice.
Well, hopefully you've inspired the next generation of high school officials
I hope
with that
so.
piece of
I hope so.
advice.
Yeah. And if
Well,
anyone's, I'll just make a plug here. If anyone's ever interested and doesn't really know how to start, the first game I officiated was when I was a student at CMU. I officiated a basketball game at St. Louis High School, which isn't too far from
yep.
Central. So that was the first game I officiated. And again, 18 years later, I'm still doing it. So it's a great opportunity to get involved. And honestly, I always say it's something that I don't do for the money, but I wouldn't do it for free.
Right.
It is nice. It's a decent side job, and it's much better than work. No, and again, no shame to this, but it's better than working at a fast food place. So, um, yeah,
Right.
it's a lot of fun too. The camaraderie, you get to work with the guys, and um, yeah, and it's a part of sports, right? And we're all looking
Exactly.
for
Yeah.
those different opportunities and experiences, and that's a great one for anyone looking to get involved.
Get paid to be part of a sporting event. That's where it's
Absolutely.
at right there.
Yep.
Awesome.
100%.
Well, thank you so much, Don, for joining me on this week's episode of the CMU Sport Management Podcast. This has been a great conversation. And thank you to everyone for listening to this week's episode.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kyle. Appreciate it. And fire up chips.
Fire up chips, of course.